Okay, thank you guys for coming and listening to my speech. I'll just get right into this. The death penalty, also known as capital punishment, is an act of legally authorized execution of an individual as a punishment for a committed crime. I know this sounds pretty intense, but just bear with me as I explain to you. It has been a long-standing debate of whether capital punishment and the death penalty should be allowed to be authorized by law. Many countries and states have abolished the use of capital punishment completely, but there are still many places that use it today as a punishment for extreme cases of a crime. It is overall a more sensible and safe way to have capital punishment allowed in the government for many reasons, and I will explain to you these reasons. Capital punishment is reserved today for brutal and heinous crimes. An example of one is a first-degree murder. Some countries expand the death penalty for other violent crimes such as rape, sexual assault, or specific drug offenses. The reason why it continues to be criminal justice systems is that spending life in prison is a disproportionate penalty compared to the actions that were taken. Although many countries have gone against capital punishment, it makes sense to have its presence in extreme cases. The Death Penalty Organization Center explains that the crimes that are most commonly known to be punishable by death often include serious offenses such as murder, mass murder, aggravating cases of rape, sexual abuse, terrorism, offenses against the state, and many more crimes have been answered by the consequence of the death penalty to the criminal. Without the death penalty as a sentence, for these horrific acts, more criminals would perform these acts because they would not have to worry about the terrible outcome of losing their lives as a punishment. While the act of death penalty is rare, it is necessary to have for crimes that are too horrific that any other punishment or sentence was insufficient. Even a life sentence behind bars would not be enough. The execution of wrongdoers have been exercised for hundreds of years, but can now be performed virtually painless. Many people against capital punishment say that it is immoral to hurt or torture anyone, no matter the crime. The government agrees with this statement. It is wrong to end someone's life legally in any painful manner unless it is requested upon. To fix this issue of embarrassing or painful deaths, the justice system has found alternative ways to end one's life that does not include public embarrassment, harassment, or torture as it so often has in the past. According to Vitana, the modern death penalty in the United States has evolved into a process that is almost completely painless and yet still very effective. Lethal injections of certain medication cause a person to stop breathing and their heart to stop beating. This process is much more compassionate than electrocution, firing squads, or hanging, which were all very common in the past. The new technology makes it so an execution does not humiliate or hurt any criminal. The death penalty also saves lives in a weird way. The death penalty also acts as a deterrent to save lives and discourages severe wrongdoing. Studies done at Colorado University about the death penalty conducted that somewhere in the range from 3 to 18 lives can be put something aside for every execution for a liable killer. Their research shows that the death of a criminal can save 5 lives and prompt 5 others to resist crime, which as a whole saves even more lives. Many people disagree and say crime rates do not go down where or when the death penalty is put into action. This may be true to the overall crime rate, but Connectus has studies that show that lives are saved unless capital punishments are performed. So although the overall crime rate is not changed by the death penalty, it affects the more major crimes. Capital penalties go down because the death penalty makes some realize that if accomplishing something comes at too high of a risk, they should change their conduct to stay away from those expenses. As people see the possible sentences, it lowers the amount of horrific crime and the amount of deaths, whether it's death by capital punishment or death of a victim. Not only does the death penalty protect lives, but the death penalty is not put into action, it would mean giving up on justice for crime victims and their families. The families affected by the previously stated crimes are left devastated and in agony for their victimized family member. The death penalty helps the family gain closure and it saves society from more harm from the same criminal. ACLU has an interview with Emmanuel Kent, who is a circuit judge in the U.S. Court of Appeals, states that society is not willing To demand the life of somebody who has taken somebody else's life is simply immoral. So the question really is, when the system works and when you manage to identify somebody who has done such a heinous evil, do we as a society have the right to take its life? I think the answer is plainly yes, and I would say it is immoral for us not to. Close quote. It also reduces the influence that person would have in prison populations, which may influence behaviors and choices of nonviolent offenders upon their release. Having a functional death penalty law would help protect the public from society's worst criminals and bring some measure of closure to the families whose loved ones were cruelly taken from them. My final point is that lifelong sentences for guilty criminals who should await the death punishment are an out-of-line financial burden for the state. Those who are given lifetime sentences are still living off taxes for their whole life. Most of those contradict that the death penalty is costly and is too much money to perform. This statement is, however, very wrong. A source called Theme Country has also done research on this topic and found that following through with the death penalty could cost up to $2 million at the very most. But if we were to calculate all the costs of an arrest, all the expenses of trials and appeals, and the annual increases of cost to ensure for a criminal to be sentenced for life, could potentially add up to $5.5 million. So according to that research, it is obvious that an execution costs a lot of money, but compared to the price of expenses altogether to keep a prisoner into custody for a lifetime, it is half the price to do death penalty. It is also a small price to pay to end the life of the criminal, then risk their escape or release and have them return to committing more capital crimes. In conclusion, the death penalty should be legally used and permitted as a result for such terrible crimes when the sentence of death would be the only fitting punishment for the person in question. Those who commit crimes or murder, terrorism, aggravating cases of rape, or other previously listed capital crimes should be sentenced to the death penalty. To have anyone alive who has committed such crimes is unnerving. It is failing at giving justice to the community, to the victim's family, and to the face of the government. The performance of this act gives some closure to the families of the victim, it provides a certain sense of safety for the community, and it makes other criminals rethink their crimes because they do not want to be sentenced to death. The death penalty is a good thing to have exercised in the face of horrific crimes committed, and most definitely should be used to the government of laws. Thank you guys so much for listening to